all of the site columns with the same internal name, so I can create that same site column manually across many sites if I choose to, they are considered the same by SharePoint as by SharePoint Search. Emily told me that like 18 months ago, and I said, "Get out!
There's
no
no way,
sir.
Emily. You're never right. You never know what you're talking about."
It was
Emily.
like
Emily is
the clouds
always right.
parted, the choir sang.
We are ready to go. It is March 22nd, 2023, and today's Ask Some Practices around customizing and extending search. Love this photo that Emily came up with. That's a great one. Today we are sort of a full complement. Derek is coming in very hot from a client call, and Emily is out today. So our agenda for today, we are going to talk about SharePoint Search versus Microsoft Search, which is a little bit of something that we've sort of covered a couple of sessions ago, but we're going to do a little bit more about that. We're going to talk about site columns, meaning crawled properties versus managed properties. And that's kind of until you're deep in it, that's a confusing topic. So it's good for us to level set and reset everybody's understanding of those two things. We're going to do a little bit of discussion around KQL, the query language that we can use for search. Derek, if he can make it, is going to try to enlighten you about result sources in SharePoint Search, and there's some more to talk about there. And then modern PnP Search web parts, again, because they're one of our favorites. So let us dive right in. Mark, would you like to take it away and just reset us on SharePoint Search versus Microsoft Search?
Sure. So we've used this slide in the past, but what we're really trying to get at here is what our opinion is of the differences and the sort of readiness to do the kinds of things that we're going to talk about in the rest of the session. SharePoint Search, because it has been around for a long time, and we have a lot of very flexible tools that we can use to manage it, whereas Microsoft Search tends to be a little more rigid. It's not as mature. Microsoft is adding capabilities to it all the time, but because of what we're going to go through today, we're really focusing much more on SharePoint Search because of some of the capabilities it has and the cool stuff that we can do with it.
Cool. So we are definitely doing the SharePoint Search thing. So let us move on and talk specifically about using SharePoint Search and how it is still the tool of choice.
It is, because it's got a big magnifying glass.
Right. So Mark, site columns. What do we want to know?
So when one of the things that people do a lot when they're using SharePoint is that they build a list or a library and they add columns to it. Those columns are called list columns. They're local to that specific list or library, and that's it. You're acting very locally, and you don't get any sort of global benefit from it. As you're sort of going up the maturity model for your information architecture, you want to start making columns as site columns instead of list or library columns. That means they're not defined in the list or library. They're defined at the site level or in the content type hub, and then reused. So for example, we might have a column for country, and we've got a managed metadata term set for it. Well, if we define that at the site level, we can use it in multiple lists and libraries, which is good. If we define it in the content type hub, then we can use it in multiple lists and libraries in multiple sites. So you sort of want everything to bubble up to the level at which you think it's going to have value. There are some site columns that you're going to want to create at the sort of in the content type hub at the tenant level, because they will be reused in more than one site, and it only has to be 2 for that to be a good idea. Or you can build them at the site level if you think that they're very self-contained, like something that's about HR content that is never going to be used in any other site. Site columns then are building blocks for content types. A lot of people don't use content types. They just dump documents into list libraries and sort of wonder why there's no magic. I've talked about this for years. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. But we build these site columns so that we can reuse them and add them to other content types. And we want to reuse those site columns for similar purposes. So for example, that country column, lots of times when people add a column to a list, they might say something like, policy country. And then the other list is, another list might be benefits country. Well, they're both country. They're not different things. It's a concept of a country for your organization. So your list of countries actually might be different than our list of countries, but you've defined that term set to feed that site column. So you want to try to focus on reusability. Don't come up with a very specific name for a site column. Come up with the name like country that is ambiguous enough that you can use it in multiple places, but also specific enough so that people understand what it is, and country would be a great example. Site column. So one of the cool things about site columns is if you manually create them in multiple sites. So say I've got an HR site and I've got a project site of some kind, and I create a site column in each of them, and it's called country. It's got the same internal name. So like if say you create it, instead of just country, you say country name, and you don't put any spaces in that site column when you create it. That's the internal name. You can rename it and put the space in if you want the display name to be pretty. The internal name does not change. All of the site columns with the same internal name, so I can create that same site column manually across many sites if I choose to. They are considered the same by SharePoint as by SharePoint Search. That is something I actually didn't even know until about a year and a half ago.
Yeah,
I
I was
always
just going to
thought
say
you
that's
had to.
cray.
Yeah, I always thought you had to create site columns in the content type hub and consider, they had to come from the top, but you can create them with the same internal name in multiple places, and they all become the same crawled property. Which is
let me jump in and add some admin stuff. So that is a great argument for doing things like site scripts, site designs, and automating site creation, because then you don't worry about, do I put the space between country name or not? Because you have a process for it and you get the benefit of that.
Right.
So I thought it was at the GUID level, so that's
it's not
interesting.
It's not,
yeah,
which is really cool. See, you're learning something.
I learned something. I learned something today.
Emily told me that like 18 months ago, and I said, get out.
There's no way.
Sir.
Emily, you're never right. You never know what you're talking about.
It was like
Emily is
the clouds
always right.
parted, the choir sang, saved a lot of trouble. So on the right side, there's a big warning. Microsoft does not do this right. If you use their templates, they don't use site columns. They don't use content types. They don't do anything like this the way they've built the platform to do it for years and years.
See my
That's
comment
horrible.
in the chat about the number of horrifying PMs who do not get this. Hey, Casper asked about, does content types work the same way? And now, inquiring minds, including me, want to know. Can you? No, probably not. That's based on GUID. Yeah.
It is based, and it's not actually a GUID. It's a content type ID, which is,
well,
it gets
yes.
added to, but same concept. Yes, it's an
it's
ID.
A concatenation of GUIDs.
Yes, we can't do that magic with content types, but we can do that magic with site columns.
And if we do that, we can, if we do the site columns and site scripts, we can hard code that not GUID unique identifier to make them match.
Yes,
so you can leverage it that way. Yeah.
Which, since that's all I ever do, like I never even had to worry about the internal name, so it wouldn't have even dawned on me because I'm always creating a site column with some sort of script or whatever.
If you're automating things, then of course you're going to be much more consistent. But the nice thing about the site column internal name is that you can do that manually, and you get the magic.
I might make an argument that even if somebody goes, well, I'm just going to have this one list and it's the only one, and this is the display area, and so I'm not going to worry about having site columns for it. I might argue even then, there's still an argument to be made, because what if you want to do some really cool filtering or searching on that, and you wanted to apply the search web parts to that, and you were going to create a custom visualization for that, even though you can do it list formatting and stuff like that, you might want to create a little app experience that you can do, with the web parts. And if you don't have them as search fields, you can't do that. So even if you had the list and we're going to put the search in the same spot or even another spot, you've just limited yourself. So I think wasn't it Andrew Connell? Can somebody help me with this memory? This is like literally back in the, yeah, I know, right? Wasn't it Andrew Connell who wrote a blog post about doing site columns and content types and saying that he always does, his defaults to doing everything as a site column now? I think it was him. Anyway,
I was just thinking this is the title for a great blog post. All columns should be site columns.
Well,
I would venture to say that that was in his web content management book back in 2007.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And so I think I read that way back then and like took it to heart and just did it. And I've never done anything different. I don't make lists with list columns.
Yeah.
Unless I'm testing something, which is a different thing.
It's a great thing to tell people, but unfortunately it requires some of that sort of SharePoint 201 knowledge to go into list settings and go into site settings and things like that. So it's a little, the barrier to entry is higher. And the way they built the modern UI to add columns, there's no option to say, hey, shouldn't this be a site column? So the UIs actually encourage bad behavior. They want you to be able to set things up really fast, but then you can paint yourself into a corner. You will never lose out on anything by making something a site column. You will never lose out on anything by making something a content type. Always err in that direction.
Just more work, yeah. Just
the challenge, more work, but you'll appreciate your future. You will appreciate it.
Not that much more work. Let's not be lazy, people. All right.
Caleb has his hands up.
Oh, Caleb, go.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is we as SharePoint professionals do all this stuff. We follow these great patterns and whatnot, but then we hand it over to our citizens and say, here's your site, go forth, be fruitful and prosper. And they go, oh, look, you made a choice field for me. I'm going to go change those values in my list content type. And
well, you shouldn't have created a choice column to start with. I mean, don't get me started on that.
Another religious conversation. I thought we were here for data.
That's why I think a successful organization, a successful information architecture requires a consultative capability internally to help people with this stuff, so that they don't isolate themselves and lose out on some of these benefits. Much longer conversation.
Yeah, that's like a whole governance conversation.
So once you've set up those site columns, that's cool. You've got the data. You're able to add the data into your list or library, and that's good. But nothing magical can happen with search until you go into the search schema in the SharePoint, either in the site settings or the SharePoint Admin Center. And let's focus more on the SharePoint Admin Center because it's always better to do things higher up. What you need to do is, so that site columns then are crawled by the search indexer. So that's one of the things that makes them good. If you create a site column and you have values in that site column somewhere, a crawled property will be created that manages the values in the search index for you. Those crawled properties are of no purpose as they're created. They're there, but once they're there, we can do other things with it. So what we do is we map a crawled property to a managed property. We can map multiple crawled properties to the same managed property. So for example, if you've had people create, benefits country and policy country, and you've got a bunch of columns that are actually providing the same values, you can map all of those crawled properties to the same managed property if you need to sort of band-aid the fact that it hasn't been done right in the first place. But ideally, you're creating these site columns and reusing them so that you don't have to have that kind of multiple mapping. Now, on the bottom there, what you're seeing is a screenshot of the lovely old crufty classic UI for the search schema, which may never change. And what I've done is I've mapped the crawled property, which is an out-of-the-box crawled property called site name, to refinable string 00. That's one of the first things I do when I go into any tenant, because I may want to have a search experience that lets me filter by the source site, the name of the source site. So if we've got a crawled property for country, it will actually be OWS_country. That OWS stands for Office Web Service, which is a trivia question that you can now answer. Office Web Server. Sorry, I said service, didn't I?
Wait till it does VTI bin, folks.
Yeah.
Oh, I know that one.
I know that one too. We're not
We all
going to
know
tell
that one.
anybody on this call. We're going to make that a
Next call.
exercise for
Yep,
the
got to
real.
show up next week.
So once you've mapped that column to a refinable string in this case, because site name is a string, there's also refinable date, there's refinable Boolean, there's refinable. So the different the different field types are represented in refinable things. Then you can use that refinable string 00 in this case to filter content in your search queries. So I can, right up at the top of the box in a SharePoint site, I can type refinable string 00 : Angola, and I will get any content that comes back with that country name, or in this case it's site name, but that country name if I've mapped country. So that exercise is really one for the information architect. This is a SharePoint admin thing, or a site owner thing if you want to do it locally, but I would always err on doing it in the SharePoint admin center. So you need to have some sort of central enterprise kind of thinking to do this well. It's unfortunate that we can't sort of flip a switch on any column that we've added in a list or library and just make it searchable. But
yeah, because there is a managed property that matches the crawled property, but the gotcha here is that it's not refinable. And that's what the additional refinable string piece of it is. So you can retrieve it, you can query it, but you can't refine it. And
right.
so
Yeah, you see those columns there. Refining is the important one. You would need to be able to refine and search on that thing.
Well, you can search, but you can't refine. So it's a matter of making sure that, like, if you have 5 pieces of metadata in your list item that you're retrieving, let's say, and you need to display 2 or 3 of them, but the other ones you want to be able to filter by, then those few that you want to be able to filter by, you got to map to the refinable string. The other ones you can retrieve with the managed property that gets created for it. It was something that I had forgotten, and that's why I included Mikael Svensson's blog post from 2014.
Yeah, and Casper mentions the 24-hour wait.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's not really a 24-hour wait. So obviously you have to, first of all, you have to have content somewhere that has a value before that crawled property will even show up. Then when you do the mapping of the crawled property to the property name, that has to then also have a crawling action. I don't know what we call that one, before refinable string 00 in this case would have something that you could query against. If you go back and you re-index one of the libraries or lists that have that particular crawled property in it in the advanced settings, and make sure that you click the button and say, yeah, I really want to do it, even though it warns you, and then click OK or save. I can't remember what's on that screen. Then within usually minutes,
I would say.
Yeah, within an hour at most. There are times when it's 24 hours, but that's these days very much an exception. But if you go do that manual re-index, you should get much quicker results. Or do it at the end of the day and then pick it up again in the morning. It absolutely sometimes takes a long time, but I think that is not the norm anymore.
In all the cases where I've had it take that long, though, since about a year ago when I had it last happen to me, there was a problem with search in that tenant. So the tenant had some problem, and twice now I've had to go through and escalate through support, which I don't recommend anybody do, but if you need it, you need it, to get them to finally get to somebody who actually understands how search works in SharePoint, and then they'll issue a reindex for your entire tenant, and then
so they
fixed,
talked to Michael
and it doesn't. Essentially, and I've literally had to be like, okay, here's the ticket number. They don't believe me. I've had to actually explain what Microsoft Search is to support, and then I take the ticket number and I give it to Michael, and then Michael goes and finds some senior tech in support, and they solve it for me in like an hour. But
I think far more often it's that we actually don't have content, or we haven't re-indexed. And I've sat there for hours hitting refresh and realized that I didn't add an item yet. It drives me bananas.
Yes.
So we should probably move forward quickly because we only have 10 more minutes.
Yes, we probably should.
Yeah.
So KQL queries, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth here. I just wanted to highlight, there's a link on the page. There's probably a link in the references as well. There is a nice document on KQL syntax reference, and this can be more powerful than you would think. So worth reviewing, worth reminding yourself of some of the cool stuff you can do. Essentially, being able to filter for different property names and using things like the colon, which is an inclusive one. It's very similar to equal. You should read the document on what the difference of those two are: less than, greater than, less than or equal than, not equal to. And then there is the KQL operator. So there's and or, but there's also not, and that one can be really, really helpful. There's different things for grouping and synonyms and wildcard and exclusion queries, and different things you can do with ranking. Like you want to have a top level search result. You only want to return things with a higher level of ranking. You can use parentheses in different ways. So there's a lot of magic you can do with KQL, and that reference is pretty handy. Oh, Julia.
Yes. I'm going to talk about result sources because I'm a huge fan of result sources. Essentially, they're a way for us to limit our search results to a specific set of content or a subset of the search results. It's your Julia Childs moment, right? Where you can put your search query and into this result source, and then you can pull it out when it's ready. So it gets indexed at index time specific to your query. So say you have 1 million items in your SharePoint, in your SharePoint search index. If you need to bring back only the documents that are using one content type, if you put it in the web part and you do a search right away, you're going to have to pull back and go through that 1 million records. If you set a result source up to do that work for you, that gets indexed, and then you can do your search against, say, those 100 documents that you want. So it's really about speed and efficiency of your queries. So especially when you want to do something that's really big, like maybe I want to pull all the site pages that we've created. I want to pull all the site pages that are associated with all the different hubs and child hubs that we've created. That could be 10 or 15 different hub IDs, and trying to put that in the little narrow window in the PnP Search, window is really challenging. So I would use a result source there to get that, use that as a management tool.
And we used to do this. Really, we had to do it for efficiency because search indexing was just the search engine was too slow. Now it really helps us with simplicity, I think, more often than performance.
Exactly. I've seen it help in performance issues, but it's more around simplicity, around management. And the cool thing is that you can use any of the KQL that Julie put in there before and have all of that complexity in one spot.
And make a change, and it takes effect wherever you've used it. Sorry. Julie.
Well, exactly. I was just going to say that. So it can make like an advanced user can set up a result source that then a maybe slightly less advanced user can use with the PnP Search web parts in a lot of different places. So that can be a really like a helpful extra thing. And or just managing the change, like if it changes, being able to do that. And should we mention there was like some confusion around result sources not being available anymore? I just feel like we should just, mention that again. It's result sources are not going to be available in Microsoft Search or some mapping that was happening. It has zero to do with SharePoint Search. They're not going away. We're all good. No problems. So I just wanted to bring that up.
All right.
Okay, so modern PnP search web parts. Mark, go. We have 5 minutes.
All right. So you've done all of that work, right? Like, why would we do that? That's a lot of mucking around with settings and stuff. Well, the PnP modern search web parts are gold for making, custom built search experiences. I hate using that word, but I'm using it. So you could just drop a search results web part on a page that finds a bunch of stuff from multiple sites because you've got this good information architecture, you've set up managed properties, you've got some filters and stuff. So you can start to return results very easily because you've done that work. So for example, in that little screenshot, there's search terms and then SP content type : policy. So that will filter only things that have the SP content type as set to policy. So that's one very obvious thing. But that little box underneath search results in the screenshot can have any KQL in it. So it can either be dynamic because you actually have a search box on the page, or it can be just KQL driven, which is pretty cool. You see on the left-hand side of that little screenshot, refinable string 00 is checked. So that means that we want to pull that column back from the search engine when we make a query, and we're going to do something with it. So we have to check that box so that we retrieve it, so that we can then use it in our query or use it as a filter on the page. All kinds of stuff. We've talked about the PnP modern search web parts on many of these calls because they're so powerful and they're such favorites of ours. But this is what you're aiming at when you do that work to set up the site columns, crawled properties, managed properties. And those the two videos on the right side are sessions that we've done in the past that get into much more detail about how the PnP modern search web parts actually work. The employee directory and a policy center are sort of case studies of how this can work.
Yeah, it's a really good way to, as someone who writes a lot of customizations for the platform, this is a real interesting way to bridge the gap between custom and not custom. We can do a lot, and if you're particularly crafty with front end, client side, HTML and CSS, you can be incredibly crafty with how these solutions are looked by creating your own custom handlebar templates and going nuts with it, and doing some work with Stefan Bauer on trying to make that a little bit simpler for people as well. So this is definitely a real power tool. All right, gotchas. I could read these. Maybe I should just do that. Content types and site columns will not appear as filters as this content type has not been tagged with them already. What does that mean?
Basically, if you create these site columns or content types and you have not created any content using them yet, none of this magic happens, and you sit there refreshing like I do, and you spend hours cursing everything. So you have to have content that uses these structures before you can make any of this stuff work right.
That was just a sentence and a half. Site pages, this is interesting because site pages have to be published for that column to show up. That's that published step is clearly something nobody was probably expecting. It was definitely a gotcha. Title not being sortable. Yeah. Yay, that's fun. That's fun. Crawl properties cannot be returned by the API, and this was hadn't done search in 10 years and forgot about this. So that's my contribution to today's lesson. And let's see.
I can do that one. So so when you're mapping a crawled property to a managed property, depending on the kind of column you've created, you'll see you say your site column name is country, and you type in country to do the mapping. Well, you might see a bunch of variations on OWS underscore country. When in doubt, it is that OWS underscore country, not OWS underscore tax ID underscore country or OWSQ CHCS underscore country. Depending on the column name, there are different versions of those crawled properties, which represent the more complex value So for instance, the tax ID one is for managed metadata. It includes the GUID and the text and stuff. You don't want the GUID in the text. You just want the text for your filters and things like that. So that is what you would want to use. I see people running into this all the time, but I've mapped it and it's that thing. And it's like, why isn't anything working? Well, because you've chosen the wrong thing to map. And it's easily fixed, but it's frustrating when it happens.
Okay, cool. So we're at the hour. So let's just quickly say we have some resources here. One from Emily, building metadata on SharePoint Online. And then the Learn article on how do site columns become managed properties, and the KQL syntax reference. So our next up is April 5th. Filth. April 5th. And we are going to be, well, the title that Emily came up with was Building the Plane While Flying It. So we're going to empower users when implementing Microsoft 365. CS Live, there is just a lot happening in the next few months. I don't know if we're up for it, apparently. Vegas with the collaboration conference Techrama in Antwerp. A big group of us going to Dusseldorf for European Collaboration Summit. Thrive with Emily and Mark. And then EduCon DC, which is a big conglomeration of us. As always, check Andrew Connell and myself out on Cloud to Clarity if you are a developer or interested in development or development adjacent, and or have a friend who's a developer for them. And we thank you as always for joining us, and please come back and see us soon so we can have lots more fun. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask in Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues. Join us again as we release new content every other Wednesday.